Welcome back. You know, before we went on break, we were talking about countering and arguing, but I also noticed on the list the idea of forgetting. I mean, how is forgetting abusive?
Well, certainly appearing to forget is abusive. If your partner asks you to do something and they're depending upon it and it just slips your mind, or I didn't write it down on my dayminder, or whatever. And again, some of that is done at the unconscious level. Sometimes in being abusive, when we don't have a high opinion and respect for our partner, we just don't pay attention to some of the things they say and what's important to them. And so it just goes out of the memory.
Okay, so the forgetting has to do with you aren't important enough for me to remember what it is you said to me.
Right.
Let's take a quick look at our list again.
Sure.
I know I certainly didn't memorize it. We had ordering and demanding, trivializing, blocking, and diverting. It strikes me that ordering or trivializing, wouldn't that have to do with, again, you're not very important, what you're thinking isn't very important?
Or I'm in charge and you need to do what I do. I had a client in my office just earlier this week whose father would put her in a chair and say, sit down, shut up, and do what I tell you to do. And she encountered a boss who did the same thing, so you can imagine what sort of a reaction she had. Okay? And that's very, very abusive. In her case, physical abuse was also involved.
Okay.
And it's also true in all of the cases I've looked at, and I think the people, clientele that Lou deals with, that physical abuse has always been preceded by verbal abuse.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, my understanding, I know we've done shows on domestic violence before, and that my understanding is that yeah, it usually starts with the name calling and that sort of thing. That it, you know, it's pretty rare for it to go immediately into sort of a physical act.
Right.
You mentioned on the break that there's some differences in the two populations you work with about this area.
Yes, Dick works with a lot of couples that are in the Silicon Valley system. I'm not even going to say educated, but some of the folks I work with are coming in pretty wounded. They're coming in with a chemical dependency or codependency issue, and some of the tools that we may use universally might have to be fine-tuned a bit for some of the folks I work with, because to stand up and say, this feels abusive, I won't deal with this anymore, some of the I statements that we know ultimately work are very difficult and really need to be taught and coached to some of the folks I work with.
So how would you start then? It sounds like there would need to be some steps preceding that.
Start with education.
Okay.
You know, just a basic. This is when he tells you that you don't matter, when you've prepared a dinner and he forgets to come home to it, when he tells you that you can't go out and do what you were planning on doing. For many of our clients, that comes from a fear base. So we're dealing with a fearful abuser and a just as terrified receiver. So to educate them around what are the basic bottom lines of what is verbal abuse.
Okay.
That this is not acceptable, because for some of these folks, they've been hearing this stuff since the get-go and they don't even know any longer.
Okay.
Verbal abusers are violating boundaries.
Yes.
Okay.
And chemically dependent people, when they're using and in recovery, don't know what boundaries are. So that's part of what they have to learn first, how to establish a boundary and maintain it in an appropriate way. Then you can say, hey, that's yours, this is mine, stay over there and behave yourself.
So part of it has to do with gaining the self-esteem to feel like my boundary or you can't say those things to me. I'm worth enough that you can't talk to me like that. Because I imagine that some of the people you might be dealing with, I know that are similar to many of my clients, you know, have no sense of entitlement at all. I mean, you know, it's at least you're talking to me. You know, so you're abusive. At least you're speaking.
But at least you're there.
At least you're with me.
We both know a gentleman who grew up in a severely physically abusive situation, and he came to the conclusion that physical abuse was better than not having any attention at all.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So
At least someone noticed.
At least someone was noticing me. So it depends on where somebody's coming in with their own history, with where you would need to start with this.
Exactly.
How would I recognize that I am being abusive if I'm the abuser?
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, at one hand, it seems easier that I could spot it outside of me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to be told.
Someone would have to tell me,
Someone has to tell you.
Well, wouldn't I be able to? I would think there would be reactions from others that might give me a clue. I mean, I don't know, I'm thinking out loud, but...
But generally, they're the reactions you're trying to get.
Oh, good point.
Okay, you're demonstrating your power, and people are basically submitting to it or walking away. And if
Okay.
they submit to it, then you've gotten what you wanted.
Okay, and if they walk away, I can attribute it to something's wrong with them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
or I'll get them later.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
But when it's called to your attention, then if you're not doing it consciously and you are willing to pay attention to it, then you have a lot of opportunity for changing, practicing the new behaviors.
Okay.
But if you're pathological, then we have a problem.
Okay. Well, you know, I also noticed, like I had a client say to me recently, you know, I have always been in verbally abusive relationships, and for the first time I'm dating someone who's not. And I can feel myself doing things to sort of provoke some sort of
Yes.
Abusive response. Is that, have you
Sure.
heard that before?
Because that's
Yes.
something accustomed and familiar.
Okay.
I know how to do this.
I know how to do that.
Yeah, okay.
I know how to be yelled at. I know how to deal with abuse. I don't know how to deal with being loved.
Well, and part of, I think, you know, we talked about it, and part of, I think, what was going on for her and for many of us has to do with waiting for that other shoe to drop.
Yes.
If you're being nice to me now, part of the cycle of violence, even with verbal violence, is
Right.
we've got that period of time where you're remorseful, you're being nice to me, but I'm so accustomed to at some point it's going to shift back. And so there's almost that waiting for Mr. or Miss Nice person to go away
Yes.
Yes.
and have the verbally abusive person.
And you recognize that many of the abusers, like narcissistic personalities, are very charming and seductive in the way they do their abuse.
Oh,
Okay?
okay.
And it feels good sometimes while it's happening, and you don't realize till afterwards that you've really been slapped around emotionally.
Well, give us an example of that. That's interesting.
Like telling somebody, oh, that's really a delightful outfit.
Huh.
But doing it with a little sneer in your voice, you know, a little bit of a put down, or getting you to do something I want you to do and countering all your objections and absolutely demonstrating control over you.
Okay. And if I do it with a bit of humor, I could even find myself laughing while you're putting me down,
Yes.
and then maybe a few minutes later kind of thinking, wow, what happened?
It
happened?
feels,
But you feel it.
something feels
Something
wrong.
here.
Yeah.
That's why the recipient is often in the best position to identify the abuse,
Okay.
or a trained observer or an outside observer who can see what's going on in the dynamics and say, hey, do you realize what you two are doing to one another? I've had couples read Patricia Evans' books and say, that's what we do, and we didn't know that's what we were doing.
Yeah. We just knew
So,
something didn't feel
Didn't
right.
feel right, but they knew there was something wrong. That's why they came into therapy. The communication isn't working. I feel useless. I feel worthless.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, you know, when I think about certainly abusive situations I've encountered, the whole idea of accommodating, of sort of, and I think it gets back to, well, it must be about me, so if
Right.
I do change my hair, if I do go to cooking class, or if I, you know, whatever it is I'm supposed to be doing, then eventually it will stop. So I would think there'd be really a grieving process involved for someone. If they are working with you in therapy, they recognize their partner is not going to change. I mean, then we really come up against it, because what does that mean? That means I'm either going to have to acceptingly, freely choose to stay with a verbal abuser, or I may have to leave. And that must be a
That's
very
very
painful
scary.
point for somebody to
Yes.
get to.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
Yeah,
No matter which population we're talking.
Exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
Because that's the ultimate fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so people who need to be in relationships feel desperate about it, and who have low self-esteem and therefore are hungry for love and affection, the last thing they want to do is leave a relationship.
Okay. Or have the other person leave because they're trying to change.
Right.
You know, I'm trying to
Right.
establish boundaries, and my partner says, well, I don't need this.
I don't need this. That's
I
the
don't
way
need
you're going to
this.
be. I'm leaving. Yeah.
So what was this all about anyway? He's gone or she's gone.
Yeah.
See, and the one place that leaving is not an option, where I see a lot of abuse go on, is parent to child.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, that's, I think, one of the reasons we have so many runaways.
Okay, so you're, of course, when you talk about children, you're talking about it's even harder for them to say, gee, Mom, your behavior is being verbally abusive. You know, I mean, I imagine in terms of how do you work with that to empower children or adolescents enough to set those boundaries?
A lot of it is with helping them, train them, and coach them around I statements. about owning their own feelings around it and keeping it away from pointing the finger and blaming. But if we can help someone learn to make those statements about this, when you say thus and so, I feel,
Right.
and then we're owning that statement, and it's pretty hard to get real angry when you're just saying what it feels like on the inside for yourself.
Okay. Okay, that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage for grown-ups.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, so
Absolutely.
I'm sure for adolescents or
Adolescents
children, oh my
and younger
goodness.
children have difficulty grasping some of
We
the
have a
concepts.
6-year-old grandson. It's not an issue at all.
Empowered, is he?
Absolutely.
He'll simply say, I don't appreciate the way you're talking to me.
Well, goodness.
And he's learned that from his mother, and I think it's a good lesson. More children ought to be able to speak that way.
Yes.
Good for him. That's Alexander, right?
Absolutely.
What an angel child. Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of getting to your office, if couples don't even know that that verbal abuse is happening, what do they think the problem is when they first come to see you?
We have trouble communicating.
Okay.
We'll try to work on problems, and somehow we don't get resolved. We keep going over the same thing over and over again.
Okay.
Or I feel depressed and unloved and unlistened to, and I'm not sure I want to stay in the relationship.
Okay. Okay. So you said many of them, they identify that, hey, after doing the reading, this is us. Are they relieved to have something to call it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Because then when they know what to call it, then they feel we can take steps to do something about it. And in fact, we can.
Okay.
That's the advantage of a label, even if the label doesn't really define anything. You have a sense that you can take steps to work, and that encourages the therapy.
Okay.
And if somebody's written a book about it and we're talking about it in this office, then I'm not the only one it's happened to,
Right.
because
Yeah.
we do
Normalize
feel
it,
so
right.
alone that this is really the only people that have experienced this before. So we normalize that.
Well, yeah, I would think, I know the outcome of that kind of experience is really a sense of shame that I brought this on myself, or that I know I didn't bring it on myself, but I'm so embarrassed that I tolerated it that I feel
Yes.
like I can't tell anybody else because it's just so embarrassing. I should know better, or, I saw this on Oprah last week, and, I know better than this, and I continue to put up with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, the finger has come right back. It's me. It's my fault.
Well, the other side of that, I know with other types of abuse, is that if it is me, then I have the illusion that I can still control it. If I really have to acknowledge that you are verbally abusing me, I have to recognize my limits and ability to put us in how much you're going to change.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And what am I willing to do?
Yeah, what am I willing to do about this issue,
Right.
which is, I think, just as common in chemical dependency as it is in
Absolutely.
any other
It's everywhere.
population. Okay. We're going to need to close. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. Thanks
Thank you
for
for
sharing
having
your
us.
expertise. I'm glad you were able to join us tonight. Tune in next week as we explore women who are childless by choice and learning differences. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.